The secret behind my success. They never saw it coming. You know what's funny? The same people who once laughed at how I pronounced schedule are now scheduling meetings to beg for my approval. That's what I told the mirror this morning, adjusting my executive blazer one last time before walking into the boardroom where I'd deliver the news that would change everything. But let me back up, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about something much more satisfying than that. My name is Indira Castellano, and 3 years ago I was the office joke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat in the cramped break room of Meridian Solutions, picking at my homemade lunch while my coworkers clustered around the vending machine. It was my second month at the marketing firm, and I was still trying to find my footing in what felt like an entirely different world. The transition from my previous job at a small community nonprofit had been jarring. There, my bilingual skills and cultural knowledge were celebrated assets. I'd spent 2 years helping immigrant families navigate healthcare systems, translate documents, and connect with social services. My supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, constantly praised my ability to build trust with clients who'd been dismissed or misunderstood by other agencies. But that nonprofit had lost its funding, and I'd been forced to enter the corporate world with its unspoken rules and invisible hierarchies. The salary at Meridian was double what I'd made before, enough to help my parents with their mortgage and still save money for the master's degree I hoped to pursue. The benefits package included health insurance that would cover my father's diabetes medications without the constant worry about copays. So I traded a job where I felt valued for one that paid enough to support my family's needs. Seemed like a reasonable exchange at the time. Did you hear her in the client call yesterday? Jessica's voice carried across the small space, though she made no effort to lower it. She kept saying processes like processes. I was dying. Laughter erupted from their little circle. Mark, the account manager everyone seemed to worship, chimed in with his own impression. And don't get me started on how she says, data. Data, data, data. More snickers followed. I kept my eyes fixed on my container of leftover curry, my cheeks burning. My mother had packed it with extra love that morning, knowing I was struggling at work. Now I wondered if the spices were too strong, if the smell was another thing that marked me as different, as other. I mean, where did they even find her? Whispered Carla from HR, the same woman who'd welcomed me with a bright smile during my orientation. Her resume must have been impressive because her English sure isn't. The thing is, I spoke 3 languages fluently. English was actually my strongest, but it carried the musical inflection of my Colombian mother and the subtle roll of consonants from my Spanish father. To them, this meant I was less intelligent, less capable, less American. I finished my lunch in silence and returned to my desk, where I spent the afternoon crafting marketing proposals that would later win us 3 major clients. But nobody noticed the quality of my work. Only the accent in which I presented it. That evening, I sat in my tiny studio apartment, staring at my laptop screen. The cursor blinked mockingly in the empty document where I was supposed to be writing my resignation letter. Had enough. The daily microaggressions, the barely concealed eye rolls, the way conversations stopped when I approached. It was wearing me down to nothing. The apartment itself was a reminder of the sacrifices I'd made. Located in a neighborhood that was gentrifying around me, it was all I could afford while still sending money home to my parents. My neighbors included other young professionals like me, graduate students, and long-time residents who'd watched their community transform. I'd chosen this place partly because I could walk to work, partly because the rent was manageable, but mostly because it felt like a bridge between worlds. Professional enough for my new life, authentic enough to still feel like home. My mother called just as I was contemplating whether to actually type the resignation letter. "¿Cómo está mi hija?" she asked, her voice warm despite the distance. I could hear my father in the background watching his evening news, the Spanish-language anchor's voice mixing with the sounds of dinner preparation. "Mama, I'm thinking about quitting," I admitted, switching to Spanish without thinking about it. Something that had become another source of self-consciousness at work, where multilingual conversations were seen as exclusionary rather than natural. "¿Por qué, mija? You worked so hard to get this job." I explained the daily humiliations, The way my colleagues treated my accent like a personal failing, the isolation I felt despite being surrounded by people all day. My mother listened without interrupting, occasionally making the small sounds of sympathy that had comforted me through childhood disappointments. "You know," she said finally, "when your father and I came to this country, people told us our English wasn't good enough too. But we didn't come here to sound like everyone else. We came here to build something better for our family." She paused, and I could hear her stirring something on the stove. "Maybe the problem isn't that you're different, Mija. Maybe the problem is that you're trying to hide what makes you valuable." Instead of typing my goodbye, I found myself researching the company structure. Meridian Solutions was a subsidiary of a larger corporation, Apex Industries, headquartered in Barcelona. As I dug deeper into their global operations, something interesting emerged. They were aggressively expanding into Latin American markets but struggling with cultural authenticity and local connections. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Miguel, who worked for a major advertising firm in Mexico City. "Prima, you won't believe the client we just landed. They're looking for agencies with real Hispanic market expertise, not just translations of Anglo campaigns. Wish we knew someone inside a US firm." That's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to quit. I was going to become indispensable. Over the next few weeks, I began my transformation. But it wasn't about changing who I was. It was about strategically revealing who I'd always been. I started arriving an hour early and staying an hour late, not to impress anyone with my work ethic, but to research. I mapped out every major Hispanic-owned business in our city, identified the decision-makers, studied their marketing challenges. I subscribed to Latin American trade publications and business journals. I networked quietly with Hispanic professional organizations. The early mornings became my sanctuary. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic beginning to build outside. I'd make my coffee, good Colombian beans that reminded me of weekend mornings at my parents' house, and settle into deep research mode. I discovered patterns that the marketing industry seemed to miss entirely. Hispanic-owned businesses weren't just looking for Spanish translations of existing campaigns. They wanted partners who understood the nuances of communication within different Latino communities, who recognized that a quinceañera celebration required different messaging than a Dia de los Muertos campaign. I found articles about marketing failures where major companies had tried to reach Hispanic consumers with campaigns that felt patronizing or culturally tone-deaf. One particularly egregious example involved a major retailer whose authentic campaign featured Mexican imagery in advertisements targeting Puerto Rican communities in New York. Another company had launched a family values campaign during Lent that completely ignored Catholic sensibilities. These weren't just marketing mistakes. They were missed opportunities worth millions of dollars. But I also found success stories. Small agencies that had grown into powerhouses by genuinely understanding their cultural markets. Marketing executives who'd built their careers by bridging cultural divides rather than trying to erase them. Companies that had seen explosive growth when they'd finally found authentic ways to connect with multicultural consumers. During team meetings, when Jessica would pitch yet another generic campaign targeting diverse demographics, I'd wait for the inevitable awkward silence before offering insights. "If I may," I'd say, my accent suddenly feeling like an asset rather than a liability, "the Hispanic market isn't monolithic. A campaign that works for Mexican Americans in Texas might completely miss Colombian Americans in Florida. The cultural nuances matter more than language alone." Mark would nod thoughtfully, making notes. Carla from HR started including me in more strategy discussions. Even Jessica began asking for my input, though always with a slightly patronizing tone. "Indira, what do your people think about this approach?" My people. As if 65 million Hispanic Americans were a homogeneous group I could speak for entirely. But I smiled and shared genuine insights about cultural values, family structures, and purchasing behaviors that no amount of market research could have taught them. 3 months into my quiet campaign, everything changed during a Tuesday morning all-hands meeting. RCO Robert Crawford looked haggard as he addressed the room. "I'm going to be direct with you all," he said, loosening his tie. We're losing ground to competitors who understand multicultural marketing better than we do. Our biggest prospect, Delgado Foods, just told us our pitch felt culturally tone-deaf. We need fresh perspectives, and we need them fast. The room felt tense. I knew this meeting had been called hastily. Robert's assistant had sent the calendar invite at 7 a.m., marked as urgent. Looking around, I could see my colleagues' discomfort. Meridian prided itself on being a cutting-edge firm, but we'd been hemorrhaging potential clients to smaller, more specialized agencies. I felt my heart race. Delgado Foods was a family-owned company that had grown from a small grocery store to a multi-million-dollar empire supplying Hispanic specialty foods across the Southeast. Their CEO, Carmen Delgado, had built the business alongside her late husband and was known for her fierce loyalty to authentic partnerships. I'd been following their expansion strategy in trade publications, watching as they'd rejected proposal after proposal from major agencies. The company represented exactly the kind of authentic Hispanic business success story that mainstream marketing firms struggled to understand. They weren't trying to assimilate into existing market structures. They were creating their own market, building consumer loyalty through cultural authenticity rather than broad appeal. The Delgado account could be worth $5 million over 3 years, Robert continued, and I heard several people take sharp breaths. But Carmen Delgado told our team yesterday that she doesn't think we understand her customer base. She said, and I quote, "Your people see my customers as a demographic to target rather than a community to serve." Jessica immediately volunteered to revamp the pitch. "I'll do more research on the Hispanic demographic," she promised. That's when I stood up. The room fell silent. I rarely spoke during these large meetings. "Mr. Crawford," I said, my accent clear and confident, "if I may, I believe I have some insights that could help with the Delgado Foods account." Robert nodded, looking desperate enough to listen to anyone. "Carmen Delgado isn't just looking for a marketing agency," I continued. "She's looking for a partner who understands that when Hispanic families choose a food brand, they're choosing to bring it into their homes, their celebrations, their most intimate moments. The campaign needs to speak to the grandmother who's teaching her grandchildren family recipes, to the working mother who wants to maintain cultural traditions despite her busy schedule." The room was completely quiet now. "I've been following Delgado Foods for years," I lied smoothly. I'd actually been researching them for 3 sleepless nights. Their growth strategy focuses on maintaining authenticity while expanding accessibility. They need marketing that honors their heritage while appealing to second- and third-generation Hispanic Americans who might be losing touch with their culture. Robert leaned forward. "Do you have specific ideas?" Took a breath. This was my moment. Instead of treating Hispanic consumers as a separate market to be targeted, we position Delgado Foods as a bridge between cultures. We create campaigns that show Hispanic families sharing their food traditions with non-Hispanic friends, neighbors, co-workers. We show the universality of food as love while celebrating the specificity of these flavors and traditions. I outlined a 3-phase campaign. Primero, showing traditional family preparation methods. Segundo, featuring fusion cooking that honored tradition while embracing modern lifestyles. And tercero, highlighting community. Hispanic families introducing their favorite Delgado products to diverse groups of friends. When I finished, the silence stretched for several seconds. Then Robert started asking rapid-fire questions about target demographics, media placement, cultural sensitivities. I answered each one with growing confidence, drawing on knowledge I'd been accumulating my entire life but had never been asked to share professionally. "Indira," Robert said finally, "I want you to lead the Delgado pitch." The collective gasp was audible. Jessica's face went white. Mark looked stunned. Carla from HR was frantically taking notes. "Sir," Jessica interjected, "I've been managing major accounts for 3 years. Perhaps I should." "Jessica, you'll support Indira on this," Robert cut her off. "But Indira is taking point. We clearly need her perspective." As the meeting dispersed, I caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Never seen her so assertive. Where has she been hiding all this knowledge? Maybe we should have been listening." Maybe indeed. 2 weeks later, I stood in the conference room of Delgado Foods headquarters, facing Carmen Delgado and her executive team. Jessica sat beside me, her usual confidence notably diminished. Mark and Robert flanked us, but this was my show. The building itself told a story. Located in a revitalized warehouse district, Delgado Foods had maintained the industrial character of their original location while creating spaces that felt warm and family-oriented. The conference room where we sat was decorated with photos showing 3 generations of the Delgado family, from the original tiny storefront to the current distribution centers across multiple states. Carmen Delgado was exactly as I'd imagined. Elegant, sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and jewelry that spoke of success earned, not inherited. But what struck me most was how she listened. This wasn't someone going through the motions of hearing another pitch. She was evaluating whether we truly understood what she'd built. Her team included her son Miguel, who'd taken over operations management, her daughter-in-law Anna, who headed product development, and Marcus Williams, their longtime CFO who'd joined the company 15 years earlier and had become like family. I could see them exchanging glances as Jessica started with our standard company introduction, following the same format every agency probably used. When I began speaking in Spanish to explain how our campaign would resonate with different generations of Hispanic consumers, something shifted in the room. Carmen's posture relaxed. Her team members nodded with recognition. Miguel leaned forward, suddenly engaged. Anna started taking notes. Finally, Carmen said in English, someone who understands that we're not just selling food, we're selling memories, traditions, identity. She asked probing questions about cultural authenticity, about avoiding stereotypes, about reaching second-generation consumers who might feel caught between cultures. I answered each question not just as a marketer, but as someone who lived these experiences daily. Tell me about your family's food traditions, Carmen said suddenly, directing the question specifically to me. I felt Jessica tense beside me. This wasn't part of our prepared presentation. But I recognized what Carmen was doing. She was testing whether I was performing cultural knowledge or actually living it. Ms. Castellano, Carmen said finally, how long have you been leading multicultural campaigns? I felt Jessica tense beside me. This was the moment of truth. This is my first, I admitted. But I've been living multicultural experiences my entire life. I understand these consumers because I am one of them. Carmen smiled. The first real smile of the meeting. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Too many agencies try to research their way into understanding our community. You can't Google authenticity. We left with a 2-year contract worth $2.8 million. In the elevator down, Robert was effusive in his praise. Jessica remained silent, staring at the floor numbers. Mark kept shaking his head in amazement. Indira, Robert said as we reached the parking garage, I think we need to talk about your future at this company. What followed was the most exhilarating and exhausting 6 months of my career. The Delgado campaign was just the beginning. Word spread quickly through industry networks about Meridian's successful Hispanic market campaign. Other companies started reaching out. A chain restaurant wanting to expand into Miami's Cuban community, a financial services firm looking to build trust with Mexican-American small business owners, a healthcare company needing to communicate effectively with diverse Latino populations. The restaurant chain, Coastal Kitchen, had been struggling to expand beyond their core demographic of young urban professionals. Their food was excellent. Fresh, locally sourced, with creative fusion elements. But their marketing felt generic. When I visited their flagship location, I immediately saw the disconnect. The menu featured dishes that would appeal to diverse palates, but their advertising suggested they were targeting only a narrow slice of potential customers. Working with their team, we developed a campaign called Where Flavors Meet that showcased how their fusion approach honored different culinary traditions while creating something new. We featured real customers. A Mexican-American family celebrating a graduation, Cuban-American friends gathering for a work celebration, a Puerto Rican grandmother bringing her grandson to try new foods that reminded her of home while appealing to his American tastes. The financial services project was more complex. Security First Bank had been trying to build relationships with Latino small business owners for years, but their outreach efforts consistently fell flat. When I researched their previous campaigns, I found the problem immediately. They were marketing to Hispanic business owners the same way they marketed to all small businesses, ignoring the specific challenges and concerns that came with being both a minority business owner and often a first-generation entrepreneur. We completely restructured their approach. Instead of generic small business banking advertisements, we created content that addressed real concerns. Navigating business credit as someone with limited credit history, understanding tax implications for business owners who sent money to family in other countries, building business relationships across cultural and linguistic barriers. Suddenly, I was the expert everyone wanted to consult. The same accent that had made me a target of mockery became my greatest professional asset. My cultural knowledge, which had been dismissed as irrelevant, was now the key to million-dollar accounts. But the real transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal. I stopped apologizing for mispronouncing English words in ways that reflected my linguistic heritage. When someone corrected my pronunciation, I'd smile and say, "In Spanish, we'd say it this way," then explain why the linguistic difference existed. It became a teaching moment rather than a source of shame. I started bringing my mother's cooking to office potlucks, explaining the history and significance of each dish. Co-workers who had once wrinkled their noses at the smell of my lunches now lined up to try my offerings. During presentations, I deliberately code-switched between English and Spanish when appropriate, demonstrating the bilingual reality of many Hispanic consumers rather than hiding it. Clients loved the authenticity. Most importantly, I began mentoring other employees who spoke English as a second language or came from immigrant families. I created an informal network within the company where we shared strategies for navigating workplace culture while maintaining our authentic selves. The confrontation I'd been anticipating finally came during a team happy hour 6 months after the Delgado success. I was celebrating the signing of our fourth major Hispanic market client when Jessica approached me at the bar, clearly several drinks in. "You know," she said, her words slightly slurred, "it's really convenient how you've made such a big deal about being Hispanic. Like, we get it, you're diverse." I set down my drink and looked at her steadily. "Jessica, what exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying some of us have been working really hard to build expertise through education and experience, and then you just show up and get handed accounts because of your accent." The conversations around us quieted. Mark appeared at my elbow, looking uncomfortable. Other co-workers pretended not to listen while straining to hear every word. I felt the familiar heat in my cheeks, the old instinct to apologize, to minimize myself, to shrink back into the shadows. But I'd learned something over the past months. My difference wasn't a flaw to be hidden. It was a strength to be leveraged. "Jessica," I said calmly, "you're right that I got these accounts partially because of my background. The same way you've gotten accounts because of your Northwestern MBA and your family connections in the industry. The same way Mark gets clients because he played golf with them at his country club." Her face flushed. "That's not the same thing, isn't it? We all bring different assets to our work. Mine happen to include native-level fluency in Spanish, deep cultural knowledge of Hispanic communities, and personal experience navigating between cultures. These aren't accidents of birth I'm exploiting. They're skills I've spent 30 years developing." I gestured around the room. "Every person here brings something unique. The difference is, for months, you all made me feel like my unique qualities were deficits rather than assets. The problem wasn't that I was different. It was that you couldn't see past your own assumptions to recognize the value I brought." Mark cleared his throat. "Look, maybe we all said some things we shouldn't have. You called me incompetent because of my accent," I said directly. "You mocked the way I speak behind my back. You treated me like I was less intelligent because I pronounced words differently than you do. That wasn't constructive feedback. That was discrimination." The group looked uncomfortable now, probably wondering who else had heard their past comments. "But here's what's interesting," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Your assumptions about my capabilities were so wrong that you never bothered to actually evaluate my work. If you had, You might have noticed that I've consistently exceeded my targets, that my client retention rate is higher than anyone else's, that I've brought in more new business this year than the rest of the team combined. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. So yes, Jessica, I am making a big deal about being Hispanic. Because being Hispanic in America means understanding multiple perspectives, navigating different cultural codes, building bridges between communities. Those are exactly the skills our clients need. And they're skills I've been developing my entire life. I finished my drink and set the glass on the bar. The real question isn't whether I deserve these opportunities because of my background. The question is why it took so long for anyone to recognize that my background was an advantage, not a disadvantage. The Monday after the happy hour confrontation, I walked into the office to find a memo from Robert waiting on my desk. I'd been promoted to Director of Multicultural Marketing, with my own team and budget. My salary had increased by 40%. More importantly, the company was implementing new diversity and inclusion training, focused specifically on recognizing and leveraging the unique perspectives that employees from different backgrounds bring to the work. Jessica requested a transfer to a different team. Mark, to his credit, approached me privately to apologize for his past behavior and ask if he could learn from my approach to client relations. Carla from HR became one of my strongest advocates, helping me recruit other bilingual employees to expand our multicultural capabilities. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in the daily rhythms of office life. My morning conversations now included colleagues asking about my weekend plans in both English and Spanish. The break room featured a more diverse array of lunches as people felt encouraged to bring foods from their own cultural backgrounds. Presentations incorporated perspectives from employees' various cultural experiences, rather than defaulting to a single, supposedly neutral viewpoint. The office jokes shifted too. Instead of mocking accents, we celebrated the linguistic agility required to switch between languages mid-conversation. Instead of treating cultural differences as oddities, we treated them as resources. 1 year after that first Delgado presentation, I was managing a team of 8 people and overseeing accounts worth over $15 million annually. But more than the financial success, I was proud of what we'd built culturally. My team included Maria, a first-generation Mexican-American who specialized in small business outreach, David, whose Korean-American perspective helped us understand Asian-Hispanic cultural intersections, and even Tyler, a white colleague who'd grown up in predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods and brought authentic cross-cultural communication skills. We weren't just a diversity hire team. We were the highest-performing division in the company, consistently exceeding targets and winning industry recognition for our innovative campaigns. The awards started piling up. Best Multicultural Campaign, from the American Marketing Association. Innovation in Cross-Cultural Communication, from the National Association of Hispanic Professionals. Rising Star in Marketing, from Advertising Age. An honor that came with a full-page profile featuring a photo of me in my office, surrounded by campaign materials in 3 languages. But the recognition that meant the most came from Carmen Delgado, who invited me to speak at the annual Hispanic Business Leaders Conference. 3 years ago, I told the audience of entrepreneurs and executives, I was ready to quit my job because I felt like my accent made me sound unintelligent. Today, that same accent is one of my greatest professional assets. The difference wasn't in changing who I am. It was in finding an environment that recognized the value of who I've always been. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Which brings me back to this morning, standing in front of my mirror, preparing for the most important meeting of my career. Meridian Solutions had been acquired by a Fortune 500 company looking to expand their multicultural marketing capabilities nationwide. The acquiring company's executives were flying in to meet the team and decide on leadership structure for the combined organization. I'd spent the weekend preparing a presentation that would determine not just my own future, but the future of everything we'd built. As I walked into the boardroom, I saw familiar faces around the table. My team, Robert, and several new executives from the acquiring company. But I also saw Jessica, who'd apparently been brought back as a consultant for the transition. She avoided eye contact as I set up my presentation materials. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my accent clear and confident. 3 years ago, Meridian Solutions was struggling to compete in multicultural markets. Today, our diversity-focused division represents 65% of company revenue and has won industry recognition for authentic cross-cultural campaigns. I clicked to the first slide, showing our growth trajectory. This success didn't happen because we hired people who looked different. It happened because we learned to value different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of understanding our clients' needs. I outlined our expansion strategy. Training programs for companies wanting to develop multicultural capabilities, a consulting arm for organizations struggling with cross-cultural communication, and a media production division creating content that authentically represented diverse communities. The future of marketing isn't about targeting separate demographic groups, I continued. It's about recognizing that America itself is multicultural, and successful companies need to understand that reality at a fundamental level. When I finished, the room was silent for several long seconds. Then the lead executive from the acquiring company leaned forward. "Ms. Castellano," he said, "we'd like to offer you the position of Vice President of Global Multicultural Strategy for the entire corporation. You'd be overseeing similar transformations across all our subsidiary companies." I felt a smile spread across my face. The same smile I'd worn as a child when my mother told me that speaking multiple languages would someday be a superpower, not a source of shame. "I accept," I said. As the meeting dispersed and congratulations were offered around the room, I caught Jessica's eye. She approached me hesitantly. "Indira," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Real one. I was wrong about everything." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse rather than political calculation. "Jessica," I said finally, "we all bring our own perspectives and limitations to our work. The important thing is that we keep learning." She nodded gratefully and extended her hand. I shook it. That evening, I called my mother to share the news. She cried. Happy tears mixed with the satisfaction of seeing her daughter validated in ways she'd always known I deserved. "Mija," she said in Spanish, "I always told you that being different wasn't something to hide from. It was something to grow into." She was right. The qualities that had made me feel isolated and insecure, my accent, my multicultural perspective, my experience straddling different worlds, had ultimately become my greatest professional strengths. But the real lesson wasn't about individual success. It was about what organizations lose when they make people feel like they need to minimize their authentic selves to fit in. How much talent gets wasted when differences are treated as deficits rather than assets? How many innovative solutions never get proposed because people are afraid their perspective won't be valued? My story isn't just about overcoming workplace discrimination. It's about the business case for authentic inclusion. When companies truly embrace different perspectives, when they create environments where people can bring their whole selves to work, everyone benefits. The same colleagues who once mocked my accent now seek out my perspective on projects that have nothing to do with multicultural marketing. They've learned that someone who navigates between cultures daily brings valuable skills to any complex problem. As I write this, I'm preparing for my first day as VP of Global Multicultural Strategy. My new office overlooks the city skyline, and my assistant has already scheduled meetings with subsidiary companies across the country who want to replicate what we built at Meridian. But I'm most excited about the mentorship program I'm launching, connecting young professionals from immigrant and multicultural backgrounds with senior executives who understand the value of diverse perspectives. No one should have to spend months hiding their authentic self before discovering their worth. The irony isn't lost on me that the same qualities that once made me consider quitting are now the foundation of my executive role. My accent, which was once a source of shame, is now a signal to clients and colleagues that they're working with someone who understands complexity, who can navigate between worlds, who brings authentic insight to cross-cultural challenges. I keep a photo on my desk from that first Delgado presentation. Me standing confidently at the front of the room, gesturing toward a slide written in both English and Spanish. It reminds me that success isn't about becoming someone different. It's about creating space for who you've always been to finally be seen and valued. The people who once laughed at my pronunciation now schedule meetings to seek my advice. The colleagues who treated my perspective as irrelevant now recognize it as indispensable. The workplace that once made me feel like an outsider now positions my insider-outsider perspective as a competitive advantage. But perhaps most satisfying of all, I no longer code switch between my work voice and my authentic voice. They're the same voice now. Confident, clear, carrying the musical inflections that reflect my family's journey and my own experiences navigating between cultures. That voice, it turns out, was exactly what the business world needed to hear. And now, finally, they're listening. Thank you for watching today's video. Please do not forget to like, subscribe and share. It really helps us a lot. Thank you.